we launched a couple of months ago, and that is it's candidly our greatest attempt to date to really bring in a culture of public service to the technology industry that frankly hasn't really happened before. I don't know how it is here in Israel, but in the United States, if you are a lawyer and you go and work in government, and as a public defender or as a judge, it's a very respected thing, and you can leave government and you can get a better job offer and whatnot. If you work in finance and you spend time with the Treasury Department inside government, you can go and work at a bank later. It's usually a nice kind of growing process through industry and public service. But the technology industry doesn't really have that so much in the States today. And one of the things that we are trying to change is that, because we have so many needs inside government to do technology better. And a lot of there's process sort of creates new products instead of the products being built for users. And we've had a very hard time in the past breaking that when you don't have kind of technology in the center of the conversation. And when you don't everyone here today, I think it's very hard to govern effectively. It's very hard to govern. So the United States Digital Service is bringing in some of the world-class engineers flying across our country, convincing them to offer from San Francisco to leave the beautiful weather and great view of Washington, D.C. and work inside their government. Mission-critical pressing services that government has to offer. So we're talking about things like immigration, which many of you have probably, I don't know if anyone, actually these are kind of things that you've actually interacted with the United States immigration. Right? Lots of paperwork, being a lawyer to figure out how to get access to it. We're working on taking that process right now, which is entirely paper-based, and moving that online and making it actually I'm working on veterans benefits, on federal student aid, on Social Security, on all the things that matter most that government will provide for citizens, and actually working on rebuilding those in a modern. So that's kind of one of our most fun projects happening right now. And before the United States Digital Service got started, actually it's been a long road. As many of you are probably kind of familiar with the birth of open government, which started in the first day of the president's administration. He released something called the Open Government Directive, and it's been an interesting evolution from that time to help government understand how it can actually be benefited by being transparent, by opening up data, by collaborating and partnering with citizens to actually create better products and make sure that people's doing it on its own. And we kind of evolved through through learning very basic tactics that can help improve products to actually co-creating with citizens, and then moving into a place where we're actually looking at the underlying systems that are incredibly dysfunctional and bringing in technologies to help with those now. So it's been sort of an outside-in and now inside-out process. It's been very fun to watch. So I don't know if there's any specific parts that you guys want to talk about. I'm happy to talk more about the Open Government Directive or the Open Data Policy, which is one of the executive orders and policies that I wrote for the President a couple of years ago, or the United States Digital Service, whatever you're interested in talking about. I'd be more than happy to dive in deeper. But would also love to hear about the projects you guys are working on as well.
Well, I'll start maybe by asking, you were saying something about the process that started from outside in and then inside out. Could you maybe explain further?
Yeah, I think, actually, I don't know if you guys know Van Jones. He's in the United States, he's a very famous activist, and he's now on all the news shows and CNN and whatnot, but he has a very amazing quote or analogy that he uses, where when he was an activist and he was young, he likes to say that he used to think politics was like a man walking on a tightrope, and the whole goal was to push the person to the left or push them to the right, whatever your ideology was. He's like, as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's not about pushing the person off of the tightrope, it's about actually moving the room. And I think that's sort of the evolution that we've seen with open government, where you need the advocates, you need people from outside pushing to make sure everyone's going further and everyone's doing everything that they can to kind of to push the envelope. But we had for so long not actually looked at doing this from inside as well. And I think it's an amazing partnership when you have people pushing from the outside and people doing from the inside, and when you can actually kind of co-collaborate on building things together. So one of the foundations that we in the United States that does something that's very similar to what it sounds like you guys do here, the Sunlight Foundation, has been a very great, recently we've been actually collaborating on a lot of products where we're actually building things together instead of just saying, the United States government should be releasing more data. It's actually, we're building all of the data management platforms that we're using are open source, and so their engineers are actually able to contribute and help make their products better than actually just talking and saying this should be done differently, but we're able to do differently together than just talk about doing differently, which is, I think, been a great evolution of where the movement has started. So.
How have you been? Sorry, okay. I have so many questions.
I have two more. Okay. The first question is there a country, European country or something like that, which is your role model?
Which is our role model? Yeah, that's a great question. We right now are spending a huge amount of time with the UK government because they have been doing similar. Actually, they've been doing very similar work to the United States Digital Service. They've got a couple years ahead of us, believe it or not. But so the United States Digital Service was sort of birthed out of the healthcare.gov fiasco, which I'm not sure if that news made it all the way over here to Israel. A horrible crisis, or whatever the phrase is about not wasting crises. But so healthcare.gov actually crystallized for our government what happens when you don't prioritize user needs and when you don't have technology and the geeks have a seat at the table. And the UK government actually had a similar failure when they were trying to do integrated health records for citizens, and it was a colossal disaster, millions of dollars just like ours down the drain without anything produced. And out of that they built the GDS, the Government Digital Service, which is a centralized cabinet office hiring the best of the best from the UK's technology scene to go and systematically redesign the top citizen-facing services. So basically the exact same play that we're doing now as well. And they started, but it's been very interesting kind of the different approaches that we've been taking, but we're fascinated by how they are getting their things done. And we have different approaches but the exact same principles and goals, but we have different governments. So the UK is very centralized and has a lot more central authority, and the United States government is much more federated and distributed. So we have a bit more of a top-down, bottom-up sort of movement that we're building. And we have a lot of authority from sitting inside the White House building the headquarters team, but we are networking that with 2 other layers, including teams that we're building at each of the agencies. So I don't know what the corollary would be in Israeli government, but usually like the departments that make up the entire government. And then underneath that, we're building an engineering team that works across all the agencies and looks at government-wide platforms, so things like identity management and all of the things that all the agencies need. And the UK government is building everything in one central spot, and they are actually taking the services over from the agencies and just building it internally and then giving it back, or if they are not capable of running it, taking it themselves. So it's a little bit of a different approach, and we're excited to sort of see how it evolves and how those work together, but we're very inspired by the team in the UK. They're doing absolutely incredible work, so it's been fun working with them and watching them.
Second question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you found a special approach or method you use when you want to make this project a little bit more effective, like, I don't know, MVP, something like project management approach, which helps you get things done in just a way?
I think the thing that is most important than anything is user testing. We do everything agile, which is unfortunately pretty new for government. Our entire operation is built on waterfall methodologies, and we do the same thing, whether it's buying pencils or procuring software or building software. We kind of buy and build the exact same way, which is frankly not effective in today's world when technology changes so quickly. And when you need to actually incorporate user needs and user testing and actually see how the products work. And that's not necessarily how the processes go today. In government, we usually come up with a policy idea, which is let's give citizens healthcare and here's all of the regulations and rules for it, and then we lob it over the fence to the agencies to figure out implementation, and then that goes to the engineers who code away, and then something's released. And nowhere in that process are people actually asking if this is solving the real question or the real problem, the real need. And so one of the things that we have been working on is bringing in user research. Some of the leading experts in usability and user research in the United States now work in the United States Digital Service, which we're incredibly excited about. And they've been spending a ton of time with agencies and teaching people how to actually listen to users and how to do this research. And we've been going for things like the immigration processes. We've been flying out to the service centers, which are in the middle of Nebraska, which is like the middle of nowhere in the United States. No one goes to Nebraska ever. And when the leadership, when we asked to go there, the leadership was like, "Why would you ever go to Nebraska?" Like, because that's where the people who are running your systems are. Like, why would we not go there? And it was a very kind of aha moment that this is who you need to be building these tools for. You need to sit next to them and see how they're being used, because you can't always ask, you have to see. So I think that's the most important part of the process that we're trying to bring into it, is in addition to Agile.
In the case of immigration specifically, isn't it part of the fact that the process is so cumbersome a way of making sure not a lot of people apply?
That's not the intention of it.
And to make sure,
byproduct.
And to make sure a lot of American lawyers have a good salary.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate. So yes, that is the reality today. There are many lawyers that make lots of money off of helping people navigate the immigration process, but we fundamentally in government believe that is not how it should be. That our services should not be so complicated that you can't actually help the people they were designed to help. And if that's the case, we're doing something wrong.
But it is helping the U.S. in a way, because in a way it makes sure that people that can afford to support themselves can make it in.
I don't think the lawyers who are making a ton of money off of the poor immigrants who can't deserve or don't deserve or have to pay them is actually impacting our GDP enough for it to be a policy that we're trying to improve. But no. I mean, your point is completely valid. Is that it shouldn't be this way, and today it is, and that's why we are trying to build more simple, easy to use services.
Actually, I'm going at another point, which is something that we're kind of thinking about here when we're trying to imagine if the Israeli government hires the best engineers, and there are very good engineers in Israel, and technologists in general, but when many of them not very excited about the Israeli government right now.
Yeah.
The question is how would you feel, or I'll frame it out otherwise. How many of the people excited about moving into government are not excited about Obama?
Actually, so in the United States, we're at a very interesting point in our relationship with technology companies. You might have heard about some of the recent problems with NSA, and so needless to say that there is a lot of reservations, particularly from our largest partners in Silicon Valley, about coming to work for government. A lot of Silicon Valley tends to lean more independent and not towards Democrats or Republicans. They're a little bit more independent. And so our target audience, honestly, of the tech industry is not necessarily pro-Obama. And they're not doing this because of the president. They're doing this because of the opportunity to work on services that actually change people's lives. And that's the only sell we have. We can't offer them more money. We can't offer them, all the perks of working at Google, the free dry cleaning and all those things, but we can offer them an opportunity to work on things that will make immigrants' lives easier, will make it easier for students to go to college, will actually help get veterans benefits. And I'll give you our real secret, which is our little bait switch. We often, when someone's sort of interested in what we're doing and hear about what we're working on, they often say, "Well, I can't leave my job. My family's in San Francisco or in New York or wherever, but I can come for maybe 2 months." And we try and get people to come for what fits the sabbatical programs, and they can take short leaves from your Upwork, Facebook, wherever they're working, and they come out and they work for a couple of months. And we have had 66% of the people who have come out for 2 to 3 months go home, quit their jobs, pack up their houses, and move to DC to stay working with us, because it's so amazing getting to work on these incredibly challenging problems that have so much impact and meaning. And another little story from one of my favorite engineers that's been working for us, he was ending his sabbatical and going back to Seattle. And he pulled me aside and was like, I need to give you some advice. He was very sweet. He gave me some very, very important advice about the onboarding process. Sure, what's up? He said, you should probably offer therapy for people who are going back to their old jobs because you feel so meaningless going to work. And he's like, I feel like I'm just transferring money from one rich person's bank account to another working in ads, whatever it is. And he ended up going back and then quitting his job 3 months later, and he's now working with us again. So it's the mission. It's all that we have. It's like, we have, so it's kind of describing the 3 layers of the ecosystem, the HQ team, the HQ team, and then our team called HTNF. We've got 40 people working in HQ. I think we have over 40, I'm pretty sure it's 24 are engineers. It actually might be 27. And then the bottom layer, we have 125, and almost 100 of them are engineers. And also, and actually, if you include product designers and whatnot, it's actually like 70. Yeah, we're actually doing so it depends on the actual service we're taking over. On the bottom layer, we're doing all the development in-house. And then on the top layer, when we're working, many of the systems we're taking over we're not going in to build new services. We're taking over services that have existed for 60 plus years, or in some cases way longer than that. And so we end up working, which means these services have a couple of attributes. They usually have hundreds of millions of dollars for their budget. They usually have hundreds of contractors already working on them, and they are already offering a service, which makes it very hard to turn it off and actually push grades because you can't disrupt the service. So we end up doing a lot of work with, and our engineers are very, very senior and come in and actually work with the hundreds of contractors who are already on the ground and kind of shift and change the development practices, introduce agile development, user testing, all of these things, and work with a lot of the people on the ground. But if it's a new product like identity management, we'll build it in-house.
The project you mentioned are all providing services. What about the other kinds of government documents, opening data and providing better ways for the citizens to do some oversight of the government?
Yeah, so we absolutely open.
Because in Israel, the only project that the government really does well are project that citizens pay taxes.
Yeah.
This is, cloud compatibility, works on mobile, you want to pay if you want. The benefits,
and that's the problem, and that's the unfortunate part of it. It's the same in the States right now, and Jen Polka, who started Code for America, has an amazing phrase, which is like, the most privileged people often don't ever experience what it is to try and apply for services or have to do everything. And so there's this gigantic disconnect. If you're wealthy and you're trying to buy a book on Amazon, you can do it in one click and all these things. And if you're actually trying to apply for food stamps, you often have to leave to go wait in line and leave your 9-to-5 job, which might get you fired, to go wait in line to apply for these services, and that's completely not fair. And we're disproportionately impacting the people who need the help the most. But to your point about open data and open source and everything, all areas that are near and dear to my heart, and everything that we build is open source. And we bake in open data and making enterprise level APIs and everything into the services that we build. And we're trying to do that to train the rest of government to show how when you do this, you enable so many other people to possibly, or to usually build services better than we can if you actually make that data available and open. And so we're trying to lead by example inside government and actually just start doing it so people can understand and see. We've got some amazing projects that I can't talk about quite yet, but there's been an internal struggle about building the service and just focusing on releasing a website. And we're like, this is not a website play, this is about releasing the data so other people can build even more impressive services and a whole plethora of them rather than the one website we're going to try and build. And so we're working on that right now, and we're hopefully going to release an amazing API. It's going to be lovely. We're very excited about it.
Do you have an example of a project that you created an API for something, then created your own project based on this API, but then the community, the internet, whatever, took this API and made something better than it, like from it?
Yeah, I'll give you a very small example that just happened a couple of weeks ago. So we were working on, one of the other kind of best practices we introduced is monitoring. because it's very hard to make your services better if you don't know what's actually happening. It's very sad to, not every, that's not the common best practice today. So we were working to make a tool available for free for all of the agencies. It was basically Google Analytics to understand what was happening on the federal web presence. And we released a dashboard of all of the data. We made it available and open. And we started, the agencies were very nervous about making this data available. So we started with a pilot that was just closed, so only the agency could see their data. And then we shared it with the rest of the internal of the government, so all the other agencies could start comparing what was happening on their online traffic to the other agencies. And then we made the data available to the public. And we built this dashboard, which was all open source code, and we released the code. And in less than 2 weeks, there's a city of Philadelphia that started. They took the same dashboard and used it to release all of their government traffic. And the city of California the state of California did the same thing. I think there's now 6 cities and states that are using the same dashboard, which costs them no money to develop, and they're actually contributing code back to make it better and improve. And so I think it's very interesting in the states in particular when you have so many layers of government and there's so many common needs to start looking at how we can actually. Open source is just so perfect for that environment because we can build things at the federal level, states and cities can implement at their level, and we can all contribute back and make it stronger. And citizens can also help as well. So that's one small example that's just happened now. We just released the dashboard a couple of weeks ago. So.
How did you get the agencies to agree, or you just tell them that they had to publish this information? And it seems to me like that might be probably the most difficult.
Yeah, this is the secret sauce. We do top down and bottom up. So we say, thou shalt use digital analytics, but we don't stop there. So we have the mandate that comes from the White House and the policy requirement that makes agencies follow whatever the policy is, in this case using digital analytics. And candidly, when I showed big government, that was the end of the conversation. It would be a fiat from on high, it would be written out in a memo, and it would go to the head of the agency, and it was like, good luck. Either you're going to be compliant or you're going to go off and build it in your own way. And when we started really thinking about differently is how can we help agencies get there using common platforms, and then actually, so we procured a common government-wide tool. So it was very turnkey. So they didn't have to think about what they were going to procure. They didn't have to figure out what tool to use. And then in addition to that, we actually hired a small team to help the agencies implement the code when they were having challenges doing so. And they could roll up their sleeves and actually spend time on the phone or over to the agency and help install the code snippet onto all of the websites. So it was a combination of saying, yes, you have to do this, but also we're going to help you, and here's the tool that makes the most sense and is the most effective, and let's do this together as a community, rather than just the fiat from on high. So that's been a very effective process, and that's honestly one of the pilots, if you will, for the United States Digital Service, and why we're taking such a hands-on approach now of working with agencies to get this done rather than just telling. So it's been pretty effective so far. Yeah.
So
Until the morning.
Are the people that you're approaching and the people coming in, what's the profile of these people? Mainly working for Silicon Valley, working for big corporations, or digital activists, the kind of open source activists and so on. So
yeah.
Obviously there's a mix of the two, but the question, it feels like when you move into government and you work on services, there's not a lot of time to do activism.
It depends. I think yes. The days are very long, so you don't have a lot of spare time to do anything. But that doesn't mean that you
not
have
time,
to.
like perspective, because all of a sudden you're the government, right?
Right. So it's a great question, and we have a very wide range of folks who are working with us. Everybody from, and we've recently coached 2 of the top engineers from Facebook. We have, don't tell, I know I'm standing inside of a Google building, so I'm just waiting for Google to get really mad at us, but we've.
They have their voice recognition.
They're probably getting ready to, like, they recognize my face walking into all the campuses because we do recruiting events inside Google, and it's just like shooting fish in a barrel. It's so great. But we've poached a lot of the SRE team at Google. It's been a really great program that we've been working with. The person who ran DevOps for Twitter from when it was in the fail whale days to where it is now working with us. We have 4 of the founding engineers from Amazon. So we've got a lot of people who have run services at scale and are quite candidly could go work wherever they wanted to, or they could retire. And so they're getting to kind of choose to do this. But we also have a bunch of folks, including one of the lead developers from WordPress and the person who runs PyCon, and a lot of people from the open source community working with us as well. And they haven't stopped, and we've encouraged them not to stop participating in the open source communities that they have built with their own hands, because we think that makes this so much more valuable. And that is how we start changing the culture of making sure that people understand, as a technologist and as an engineer, you can go serve your government and you can make your government better, because no one else is going to do it if we don't do it. And you shouldn't have to change who you are as a person to be able to do that. You should still be able to run all the open source communities.
I actually meant political activism rather than open source practice.
Yeah, the people still. So the only time it gets tricky is during election years, when if you're working inside the White House, there's certain things you can and can't do with public money. But outside of that as well, you're still an individual with opinions and ideas, and you don't have to be censored from that as well. Working in the United States government, at least I don't know how this is. Yes. There's so many, but one of the biggest ones, well, actually, to be honest, I think it's a question in 2 ways. One is that many of the problems that we have that are the hardest are not the technology problems. It's the culture change, it's the management, it's making sure that people actually prioritize and understand the value of incorporating technologists and data scientists and everyone into problem solving from square one. And we are making tons of headway on that right now, thank you to the healthcare.gov fiasco and things like that have made leadership understand that you have to do this now. This is not, in today's world, you can no longer separate technology from policy implementation and from great ideas, and that is just something that those two go together, and this needs to be prioritized. So on one hand, a lot of the things that we do are pretty management focused and figuring out how you can actually optimize teams for building well. But there are a lot of technology challenges as well. Most of those end up in the unfortunate reality that things like our like critical systems, such as our Social Security Administration, all of the paychecks that are cut off of that right now are running on a mainframe and COBOL, which we don't everyone who knows COBOL is either retiring or dying, so it's very hard to work in those environments.
Oh, got here late, so maybe some people here know.
Yeah, if you know COBOL, let me know. Well, I'll give you a job out. You know. So we have a lot of challenges like that. So we are working with, as we were kind of talking about before, with a lot of legacy systems that are gigantic and have unfortunately been developed over the decades, matching the silos of government. So instead of saying, let's have one product and we want to add a new feature to it, it's a different team has a different idea and they build an entirely different service, which is not totally related, and there's some, there's crazy integration problems. And so fixing it would be easy if it was one system, but in many cases, like Veterans Benefits right now, I think there's like 18 different bespoke systems that actually are involved in issuing a veteran benefits. And so it becomes much harder to identify even the problem statement, because you start looking into one and then you realize it's in the other, and it's pretty complicated. So, but usually, candidly, it's mostly management or management problems.
Think of just starting from scratch in some cases.
We have thought of that recently. In some of them. Yeah, well, that's one of the things we try and assess the various systems or services and pick off the parts that are easy to rebuild. So that was one of the first things we did with healthcare.gov was we identified where most of the outages were coming from, and it turned out 70% of them were coming from the identity management situation or solution. So we ended up keeping that running. And in the background, we're building a new one, which we built at less than a tenth of the cost. And the first management system was tens of millions of dollars and had about a 25% error rate. And the second one we built for less than a couple of $1 million, and it has a 0% error rate. And we were able to then phase that piece in without dismantling the entire, the rest of the system. So,
would you be willing to share with us some failure that you think that you've learned from, especially when it comes to what we find most interesting is open government, open data policies, and the road that one should maybe not take, right? Or
yeah. Let's see. There's a lot of things I would do. I think one of the big learnings from the open data that we've tried to apply to the United Civil Service is really emphasizing on the educational aspects and helping leadership understand what the value is. Because so many people who are in decision-making positions don't come from the world in which we operate, and so you have to spend a lot of time working on describing the value, showing the value, not just describing the value. And so at the end, one of my dear friends, Erie, got this great idea to we regularly got the question of like, well, what's an API? You're like, oh no, like it's an API, and we'll tell you, and instead of just telling you about them, why don't we build them together? So we did an executive API training, which no one came to it when it was just an API training. When we called it an executive API training, all of a sudden it was like booked out the door, and everyone was like, oh, well, this is okay if I don't know what I'm talking about, because it's, it's for a high level, and I'm a leadership position, so I can come to the executive API training. And it was amazing, because that's how you start getting the light bulbs going up and people understanding how and why this is so valuable. And so we spent a lot of time, particularly at the senior leadership level, trying to educate and help show how and why it's so important to prioritize this kind of work. That's one thing I highly, highly recommend is
having executive.
Yeah, executive education.
Executive hackathon.
We're having an executive hackathon in 3 weeks.
So I have a question. You mentioned that most, if not all, of the work at the USDS is focused around making government services available to citizens. So one of the projects we have here is Open Pension. Means making the investment portfolios of the major pension plans in Israel accessible to citizens, because we realize that most citizens don't really know what's going on in pension plans and how the money is invested. So it's kind of different than what you're doing, basically, because it's sharing information from the private sector. It's not the government. So I was wondering whether there's an attempt or some work done in 401ks or government pension plans not accessible, because I think it's probably the same in the US. People don't really like talking about pensions.
I'm thinking about that right now, and I apologize I don't know this, but I think that we have all that information actually open right now. I don't think it's not open in the United States. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. That is a great distinction and a important distinction and a great question. It's probably, just to guess, it's probably not very open, but it's definitely accessible. But I think that's all required to be public in this case. But it sounds like an absolutely fascinating project, and sort of similar to a lot of the work that we've been doing with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, when you look at the relationship between private sector and the government and how we can actually help protect the consumer or the citizen or the pension earner. But the CFPB has been doing a ton of amazing work on. Oh, I'm sorry. CFPB stands for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it was a new agency. I'm so sorry. I try and scrub acronyms out of my language and I forget sometimes every now and then. But it's a new agency that the president built in his first term, and it was spawned out of the financial crisis, where so many homeowners were getting their houses foreclosed on, and the banks were saying that and there was this he said she said game between the banks and the homeowners around the foreclosure, and a lot of lack of information and understanding of how and why these foreclosures were happening. And so he created an entire organization inside government to work on financial protection of citizens. And one of the first plays that this agency did was actually a transparency play, where they required, they actually enabled citizens to file complaints with the federal government around foreclosures and other financial problems. And then they made that data open and they released it, not the specific consumer data so that they could protect privacy of the people who are getting foreclosed on, but they released the data around the specific banks and the response rate the banks had to the complaints, and the number of the bank with the most number of complaints. And at first, the entire financial institution was freaking out that this was going to be a huge problem, and then they quickly realized it was a point of competition amongst them. And so you had the financial institution, the financial industry, going from hating the CFPB to actually they have an incredible technology team, so it's a very easy to use interface. But they were able to use this as a competition point amongst their competitors to say, oh, well, we reply to the complaints the fastest. We have the least number of complaints out of any other bank. And it was this incredible moment where transparency was able to completely shift the paradigm and the incentive structure for the banks actually providing better services for the customers, which was not technically through regulation from government. It was just through government actually enabling a new channel of communication from customers to the industry. So, yeah, not totally related, but sort of. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you guys are working on.
Just another question.
Yeah, question before.
Two little ones. First of all, what happens if the next administration wants to change something like reverse?
Yeah.
Is it even possible now that everything is open source? And how will people react?
Yep.
And the second question is do you use any components that are not open source, like Google Maps or other?
Yes. So the first one is a great question and one we've been thinking about, and this is another reason why we are such big proponents of open source, because we believe by doing all of this in the open, we make it easier for people to actually see what's happening, what's being built, and actually be able to contribute to and participate in that, but also acknowledge when if it's being changed and that's not the right thing. So we create a whole other access point for citizens to help ensure that this work carries on. But I fundamentally believe that if we continue to deliver the results that we are delivering right now, there will be no reason for the next administration not to invest in this. Hypothetically, they could. We have been working very strategically to make sure that it is as easy as possible for this to carry into the next administration. It will, at least for the first year and a half or two, given the way that if Congress passes the budget and everything along those lines. But so there will be some carryover. We won't turn into pumpkins at all. But we did not, we very intentionally did not create a new permanent structure inside government, because candidly, that is part of why government is so hard to work in today, because you have so many previous movements and previous attempts that mandated there be a chief whatever officer who are now still sitting there 10 years later, 20 years later, and not being effective. And so, to be honest, if this doesn't work, I hope we don't exist in the next administration. But right now, we are delivering amazing results, and if we continue to provide better services at a fraction of the cost that we are today, there should be no reason why the next administration won't want to continue this work. So I'm incredibly confident and not worried about that at all. We'll have a little lead time no matter what. So very, very much looking forward to see how that goes. And actually, I'm incredibly excited for the administration change, because it'll be an amazing opportunity to further look at how we can build a stronger team. When you've got a lot of different opportunities when you have someone coming into office and someone leaving. So that'll be fun. And remind me of your second question. Sorry, it was
If you use something that is not open source.
Oh yes, so the federal government does use a lot of closed source things, and that we don't have control over as much. But when we build things, we always build open. When it's something, and this is baked into the federal government in a very, very real way with our public domain. And anything a federal employee builds is part of, or if you do research as a governmental employee, all of your work is part of the public domain, which means everybody can use it. And we are actually working right now on, we're working on an open source policy for the United States of America that we are incredibly, incredibly excited about. We're just sort of getting the ball rolling, and once we get that moving, that will all be available for you to watch and see how it progresses. But the whole point of that is clarifying that just like when you do research and you are a federal employee, that is public domain. When you are an engineer in the federal government and you build code, that should also be open source. This is something that everyone should be able to use.
for everyone, not just for them.
Exactly. The taxpayers paid for it, and so the taxpayers should get to use it. This is part of.
Does that also mean that you wouldn't use
No. Yeah, because unfortunately, if we, the federal government spends over $86 billion a year on technology, and if we were to all of a sudden remove all of the, we would have a pretty big impact on the technology economy in the United States, which is one of our most thriving sectors. So we don't want to do something that is true. We don't want to, actually.
So do you have like a guidelines for user privacy of these services? You're basically giving Google voice recognition. You're basically giving Google or other companies a backdoor to knowing about how citizens interact with government. Well, there should be expectation of privacy.
Yes, absolutely. We have just recently hired one of actually the foremost privacy experts in Silicon Valley. Alex McGilvery, he was the general counsel of Twitter. He's been coming in doing some incredible work on privacy inside the White House, which we're just thrilled to have here. But the United States government is so large, and if you were to take each of the independent agencies and roll them off into the private sector, they would be larger than Fortune 500 companies. I mean, these are gigantic institutions. And so there's very little consistency in the tools that are used across them. So it's not like we are saying to the United States government, everyone, when you're using a mapping platform, you have to use it. There's a lot of different solutions and different tools, and it's because it's such a big industry. It's not like a small one company. It's a gigantic industry. There's a lot of variance. So we're actually, it's.
But do you recommend towards tools that are not kind of sharing private data with for-profit corporations?
Absolutely. Privacy protections are required. Before you purchase a tool or publish something, there's a bunch of privacy controls where you're required to go through certification to make sure you're not putting any sort of user data at risk. So there's a bunch of controls on that, but we don't. So when you're buying or building a service, but we don't say you have to use a specific service all the time. Just make sure we don't want to sway markets. Because if you specify a specific service, then maybe you are creating a company that has a tool, and 2 years later that's on the market and the dominating tool. We will fall behind the industry if we overregulate that space. So we focus on ensuring privacy of information and not privacy.
You're working mostly on the executive branch.
Yes.
The project I'm working is on legislative. Yeah, I'm working on the law. Israel Codex. US, you have the US Codex, which is so good. So it's amended, we have it on. Here we don't have it.
Yeah.
So, but my question is more on the legislative process. So when someone, the congressman wants to put in a bill, he has the final current law codex and he wants to amend it. I'm working on a project to give him tools and get feedback from the citizens and such.
Sorry, it sounds like you're using.
I'm working on a project to provide the legislator to get feedback on his proposal. We as the White House are not, just because of where we're focused. But there are a lot of groups that are working on similar tools. I'm forgetting there was an amazing. Yeah, I'm totally blanking on the name.
In the government.
In Europe, it's a common
Not inside the government. These are all actually outside of government working to help the lawmakers. We are, because of the jurisdiction and kind of where we focus, we're doing a very similar thing with regulations, because the executive branch governs regulations, which is sort of very similar to laws, but on the executive side, yeah. So we are building, and you should take a look at it. This is the tool you're using, it's all open source. You can find it actually on MT's website, but they are building on 18F or 18F.gov. But they're building it's a beautiful platform, and it's all open source, and it makes it easy to, it's very complicated regulations for builders written in a language that hard to tell where the changes were actually made. So it basically does a diff of the regulation before and the regulation after, and then you can comment on a specific line instead of, it's like a very similar interface to GitHub, sort of, but actually even easier. And it's focused on helping citizens be able to comment and understand what's changed in the regulations and actually offer specific feedback on what's in it. So you should look at the code base. It's useful.
Our basic question was about, let's say someone comes to the court and he's about something that was changed twice in the last 5 years, and his conviction is about something that happened 5 years ago. So how does the judge know the words of the law? Not currently, just 5 years ago. That's a major issue here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like an amazing project. I wonder if you guys do have a certain things.
We're using wiki source.
So maybe this would be nice for some people to talk about what they're doing.
Yeah,
Because we've, and let you drink your beer.
which is great here. You guys brew it here.
Well, our sellers, and help first.